I'll never forget being at middle school when 9/11 occurred. I was too young to remember the events of what was happening at the time. Looking back, I barely remember on it now, but it it was a regular start of the day, like all of us here in America. I'd gotten out of bed, had my breakfast, boarded the bus, and I was at school. In the summer of 2001, around August, I think, I was attending school at Ellicott Mills Middle School in Ellicott City, Maryland. I used to live in Elkridge, and I often went from between Elkridge and Baltimore and Ellicott City in between. Shortly after 8:30, I I was I was in social studies, I believe. I had no idea what was going on shortly after 8:40, but like all of us, I guess we were in a state of shock when the news came. Just uh, just before and after 9 o'clock, I had a language arts class with some of my classmates. Even before even before most of the classes started, I was able to finish some of my homework assignments that were due between the 11th and the 13th, I believe, or Friday the 14th. But after social studies and language arts, I then had art class, and soon after that, I we we all had our lunch in the cafeteria. When our classes resumed, I think I was in a history class with some of my classmates, and if I'm not mistaken, I think we were on a I think we were talking about I don't remember what it was at the time, but it could be one of the two world wars, the War of 1812, the American Revolution, or maybe the war in Vietnam, or one of the two Koreas, or something else in American history. I don't really know. But shortly after, shortly before 11:30, my teacher came up to me and said that my mother came to take me home for early dismissal. And I didn't know what was going on. I wasn't sick or anything like anyone else. I was like, thank goodness I wasn't in trouble either. But even as we left the building and we were driving away from Ellicott Mills Middle School, I saw a lot of buses parked at the main entrance. Like most school buses, it's quite understandable for them to be there because school would end in an hour or two, maybe three. But when we boarded, when we were driving down the highway and going straight home. Even as we left, I asked my mom what was going on and why we were leaving, and she said we're under attack. I had no idea what she meant or what she was getting at. And all I could ask right then was, what do you mean we're under attack? And she said, in her reiteration, she said, America's under attack. Of course, I was too young to remember, but she also said that there have been reports of some people going to schools and preparing to shoot students as they leave. Almost like a near repeat of what happened in Columbine in 1999, but completely different. With the 4 planes already gone, rumor had it that there were supposed to be school shootings at parking lots, increasing further terrorism. But at the time, I was too young to remember what it is or what was going on, or even what terrorism or what Al-Qaeda were. I only been to New York once in the year 2000 to see my mother's longtime best friend, Sir Derek Jacobi, perform Uncle Bill in New York in the year of 2000, just a year before September 11th. But by the time we got home, and as soon as we pulled into our driveway, I just went straight to my room. I didn't do anything else. At around 8:30, my mom called me down to watch President George Walker Bush, who was the 43rd president of the United States at the time, to deliver his statement and condolences and his vows to hunt down those responsible for the attacks. It was right then and there, even though I was still too young to remember, that something big was going on, and we were facing something completely different. By Wednesday, September 12th, it was all completely quiet. No school buses were coming. No planes were flying. All the streets and highways were empty. You could hear nothing but the birds. The following Sunday that weekend, my mom and I were at St. Ambrose Church in Maryland. And during Father Timothy Bear's sermon, he too was delivering the events of what happened that day. Of course, I wasn't paying attention, and even though I knew that we were into something different since the attacks, I wasn't really paying attention, nor did I seem interested. As the next 5 years had passed between 2001 and 2006, as time went on, I always kept thinking that the events of September 11th were ridiculous, and I was often quite annoyed by it, wishing that they would talk more about maritime disasters, such as what happened to the Titanic, the Lusitania, or any other 20th century liner. But by 2006, when I started living here in Florida for the very first time, all of that began to change. One day when I was at a Walmart Supercenter in Zephyr Hills with my mom, and we were out grocery shopping, a movie caught my eyes on DVD, and it was called World Trade Center, starring Nicolas Cage and Michael Pena. And right then and there, even as I looked at it and looked at my mom, Master Obi-Wan Kenobi's words from Episode 3 of Star Wars said, "There's something I must know." So we bought it, and even as we put it into the DVD player, she did caution me in saying that it's not going to be pleasant. And I just disregarded that and said, "It doesn't matter. I must know the truth." So we put it in, and I watched it from start to finish. And I was quite baffled, shocked, and appalled, and somewhat saddened by it. And just 5 weeks later, when we were visiting a Walmart here in Dade City in 2006, it was then a made-for-television movie, Flight 93, also caught my eyes. So I bought that, and after we watched it from start to finish, just like the World Trade Center movie, we were deeply saddened. What saddened me and really frightened me the most, even as the film went on, was when Ziad Jarrah, as well as his 3 lieutenants, entered the cockpit and overpowered First Officer Leroy Homer Jr. and Captain Jason Dahl. For me, that scene was all too familiar. It was like watching Harrison Ford's Air Force One in real life. And instead of using machine guns, they were using knives and box cutters. As the next several years passed on, I saw everything else that dealt with and showed the events of September 11th. 9/11 state of emergency, the last moments of Flight 11. I also saw a film called WTC, The First 24 Hours, 2001. That film was a little bit intriguing because, like director John Ford's Midway as the battle happened, that film showed the events of September 11th that happened from the time Flight 175 struck the South Tower to the aftermath of a wasteland at Ground Zero. By 2011, I was awakened with a most astonishing surprise. On the 3rd of May, I was still asleep at the time, but when I heard the news from my excited mom saying that Osama bin Laden had been killed, I just jumped for joy, and wow, it felt like justice had finally been done for America. But of course, we all knew that wouldn't last for too long, because 2 years later was when the Boston Marathon bombing occurred. But if I've learned anything since that day in September, as President Bush once pointed out, America has stood down enemies before, and we will continue to do so again. Therefore, for those of you who lost loved ones on September 11th, and for those of you who entered the armed forces, battling the enemy, and giving your life to be a good servant of your nation, and to give your life for your nation for the benefit and for the good of all American citizens, we haven't forgotten your loss. We mourn your loss. We remember the justice that's been done. And as for me, even though it'll now be 24 years since September 11th, it was a day that changed our lives, just like the events of December 7th, 1941. And like December of 1941, September 11th is also a day that will live in infamy. And that's my story of September 11th.